Hey everybody. In today's video, I want to take a few minutes to talk with you about the will of God. What is it? And how do we make sense of it? Over the years, I've known a lot of Christians, myself included, who have struggled with choices that they made because they just weren't confident that those choices were a part of God's will for their life. This could be about anything from where to go to school, to what career to get into, where to live, who to date, whether to get married or stay single, and the list goes on and on. But plenty of honest, sincere, well-meaning Christians struggle with choices like these because they're just not sure what God wants them to do in a given situation. Over the next few videos, I want to take some time to try to develop a biblical framework. How does the Bible talk about the will of God? How can we understand it better? And how can we make choices that fit within that will? For starters, it's important to understand that the Bible talks about the will of God in a couple of different ways. One way the Bible talks about the will of God is as something that is knowable or discernible. In Ephesians 5, for example, notice what the Apostle Paul tells the Christians in verse 15. Therefore be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Notice in verse 17, Paul gives an instruction to understand the will of the Lord. The implication there is if it's understandable, then God's revealed it in a way that we can know it. Now, there are other times in the Bible where God's will is talked about in a way that is secret or hidden. For example, in Acts 18, when the same Apostle Paul is visiting the city of Ephesus, some of the people there try to beg him to stay longer with them. And notice what happens in Acts 18, verse 20. When they asked him to stay for a longer time, he did not consent, but taking leave of them and saying, I will return to you again if God wills, he set sail from Ephesus. So here you notice that God's will is talked about in a way that was hidden. Paul wanted to come back to Ephesus at a later time, but he didn't know whether that was going to be a part of God's will or not. And so you notice that there are a couple of different ways the Bible talks about the will of God. One way is hidden or secret, and one way is revealed or knowable. Now, when you think about a lot of the choices that are most challenging for Christians, things like what job to take or where to move and live or who to date and marry, it's no surprise that a lot of those fall into the category of God's secret or God's hidden will. That makes sense, right? I mean, the reason we struggle with those choices is because God hasn't come out and just told us, this is what I want you to do in this particular situation. Now, in future videos, we'll have more to say about how to navigate those choices and still be within the will of God. But let's turn our attention now to God's revealed or God's knowable will. What we see in the Bible is that whenever God's will is understandable, whenever he reveals it to us, it tends to be universal, not individual. What I mean by that is that those revelations are broad enough that they're going to apply to just about everybody, no matter who you are or where you live or what your circumstances are. And again, in future videos, we'll give some examples of that as well. Last thing I want to share about God's revealed, understandable will is that it's not evaluated by feelings or emotions. Whenever God wanted to make something known in the scriptures, it was always clear. It wasn't vague or hazy. And so that means that we don't have to rely on feelings or private leadings, or we don't have to look for signs outside of the Bible to figure out what God wants us to do in our lives. As soon as we start to rely on those things, it introduces a subjective element that can often lead us astray. But God's will, God's revealed will, is objective. It's something that we can know. He wants us to have confidence in any given situation that our decisions are going to be within his will and pleasing to him. That's all for today. If you have any feedback or questions, be sure to let us know in the comment section below. And be sure to come back over the next few weeks as we continue to talk about how we can make decisions and live lives within the will of God.